Hey everyone, instead of using our time wisely to do more cool feature tests on CPUs and GPUs with all the various silicon launches that have come out recently, I'm instead going to be wasting my extremely limited time responding to Reddit comments. We don't normally bring these any light or attention because it's just not worth the time. It's sort of a disservice to everybody else who watches the content to try and learn things about new releases. But this one got a little bit of traction, and it appears to be horridly misinformed on how the reviews process works and how you as consumers should use reviews. And also looks like it was written by someone who has skimmed most of our content, because a lot of the comments really miss the point on all the times that I say things like you should watch multiple reviews or read multiple reviews to form your own aggregate opinion. So let's use this as hopefully an opportunity to learn and talk about how the transparency we provide is sometimes used as a cudgel to beat me over the head with to make me regret providing transparency. Before that, this video is brought to you by us and the brand new GN Bar Runner bar mat on store.gamersnexus.net. The new GN bar mat features a fully custom rubber mold showing computer electronics in the form of a rubber spill guard. You'll find VRM components like capacitors, inductors, resistors with detail as small as half-height legs, RAM slots, and even CPU socket pins colored gold. Except you can actually spill water in this spill-proof, easily washable socket. The 610 by 127 by 8mm GN Bar Runner is for use with drinks by your keyboard, at your home bar, in your garage workshop, by the dishwasher or sink for drying glasses, or just as a cool decoration. We wanted to make the best possible version of a bar mat and put huge emphasis on attention to detail, painstakingly designing every component in Blender for our custom mold. This bar mat spill guard is perfect for PC and electronics enthusiasts who want a truly unique product to represent the hobby. Purchases directly fund our goal to buy thermal and acoustic chambers in the future. So go to store.gamersnexus.net to buy one today. They're in stock and shipping now. So before going into this, I've not scripted a response, which is probably something I'll regret, but we're just going to go through some of the points in this post. And I've already posted in the past before this a piece that was called something like How Commenters Ruin Transparency. And that was on the side channel where I just ride my bike down a mountain and rant about comments. And one of the things I pointed out in there is there was a period where we really dialed back our testing transparency because people would try and use it to attack us with, even though it's like, so if we didn't tell you this, then you wouldn't have hit us with the information we provided you. And it's often incorrect, the attacks that are formed using that data. Anyway, first thing I want to point out is that we are always trying to improve. I am, as you likely know, extremely disappointed in general. It's just sort of my modus operandi. I'm disappointed in products and in the industry and just things that happen in the world. And that's what I think makes for such a fun job reviewing stuff. It's why I really like it, because we can see the improvements one release after another where companies work on fixing things. And you look at the case industry where a lot of the companies we've reviewed their stuff over the years and we've expressed disappointment in things, there's been a real turnaround for them. Now, the reason I'm pointing that out here is I'm also regularly and routinely disappointed in my own work. I'm fortunate in that it doesn't cripple my ability to do my job or anything like that. It's just I sort of view it as part of the process of we'll publish something and I'll look at it, I'll look at the comments after and go, I should have phrased that in a better way, or we maybe could have added some extra tests for this benchmark to prove whatever point we kind of predicted people might come up with. A great example of that would be our CPU cooler reviews, where for years I was completely satisfied with the bench we had in terms of producing data that was good enough to compare coolers. But over time, I just grew increasingly frustrated or disappointed with the sort of amount of data, the quality of data in those cooler reviews. So we spent a lot of time revamping the methodology, and it's just part of our process where I am really sort of just brutal towards my own work, and I think that constant state is what gets us to improve. I should point this out regarding the work the team does. I'm extremely proud and happy with what they do. It's just when I get involved that I'm normally criticizing the stuff. So anyway, point is, certainly we are not perfect, and certainly there are topics that a lot of other reviewers are more qualified in, like SSDs, power supplies, stuff like that. So don't have any issue with being critiqued in general. It's just that these weird, big, huge diatribes on Reddit are often framed in a way that they get a lot of upvotes, which is the more frustrating part than the person being annoyed. And it's like, I don't really have a great way to respond to them. Because if I post a response on Reddit, I'm really wasting my time because no one's going to see it. They're going to see the title, they're going to see a rant, and they're going to be like, oh yeah, GN sucks, I guess, and then move on, because that's how Reddit works. Anyway, let's take a few of these points. So this particular person basically says they're annoyed with quote-unquote transparency issues. First of all, we are very transparent in our shortcomings, so that's a little bit weird to say. But one of the things was, point number 2, big data hardware surveys, and they link one of our videos saying, in this tech news roundup, there's an offhand comment about how a hardware benchmarking site has inaccurate data because they just survey user systems and don't control the hardware being tested, blah, blah, blah. So a very interesting point that they don't name the benchmarking site. That was weird. So I clicked on the video to see what I was talking about, because I generally make it a rule to not talk about other people's work in the industry. This one was talking about Userbenchmark. Allow me to give you some perspective on Userbenchmark. I have to pull up a quote. Quote from Userbenchmark says, despite this clear performance deficiency, this is talking about AMD versus Intel and saying that AMD's CPU is clearly performance deficient versus Intel. Despite this clear performance deficiency, AMD supported 3000 series sales with an aggressive and successful marketing campaign to easily outsell Intel over the last 12 months. It says, given the real performance uplift observed in the 5000 series and the absence of any meaningful marketing from Intel, we expect CPU sales to shift even further in AMD's favor. Users that do not wish to pay, quote, marketing fees should investigate Intel's i5 9600K. Wow, where did that come from? Like dug up from the grave. It says you'd save $370 over what you get with AMD, which is, I guess, based on the pricing, they're comparing it for some reason to a 5900X instead of something more suitable. Anyway, this isn't meant to be like a Userbenchmark diss, but in the past, Userbenchmark has also claimed that they said that Hardware Unboxed and Gamers Nexus were like selling ice to Eskimos or something like that. It was a really strange, untoward comment that Userbenchmark posted, basically saying that we were shills for AMD because it was doing better. So point being that the user, back to the original post, who made this post is upset that we dismissed Userbenchmark's comments or benchmarks because we think they're inaccurate. That was specifically the phrasing that this particular user took issue with. Was they say that big data works by accepting errors, collecting a large amount of data, using meta-analysis, blah, 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 all very accurate, except you are assuming that the source data is not garbage. That's the problem. The source data here is garbage. Nobody else can produce data that says a 9600K makes more sense to buy than almost literally any other thing on the market right now. Even Intel's new things would make more sense to recommend than that. So when I saw this particular comment in the rant, that was when I was like, the only reason this didn't get more attention to it is because it said a hardware benchmarking site, not Userbenchmark, which would have immediately prompted people to go, oh, that Userbenchmark? That doesn't... Anyway, next point that this user posted that I think could be an educational topic, they mentioned Schlieren imaging as their #1 problem with us, saying, GN did a video using Schlieren imaging to visualize airflow, but that test setup images pressure gradients. It actually images density gradients, which is something we talked about in the video a lot. They said, in the situation they're showing, the raw video is difficult to directly interpret. I agree with you. Very hard to interpret, and I said that in the video. In fact, I said, we apologize that this format isn't the best, but we're doing our best to try and figure it out because this is the first time we've ever done something like this. The user goes on to say, it makes the data that they're showing a poor fit for the format. There are analysis tools you can use to transform the data into a clearer representation, but the raw info leads to conclusions that are vague and hard to support. Okay, that's what I said. For comparison, okay, yeah, so basically they're saying we should have done smoke or something instead. So Schlieren imaging is super cool, and it does show some different stuff than smoke will. It shows the density gradient, and in the video of the Schlieren imaging, I was extremely forthcoming in saying, I don't really know how to present this data, and I don't necessarily think you can extrapolate and apply this across how the card performs everywhere. In fact, I explicitly said that you can't use the Schlieren imaging data we produced to show how the, I think it was a 3080, would perform in a case, for example, because we can't take that imaging with it in a case. The nature of it is that there's a mirror, and you have to be able to see the mirror in order to see the imaging. And so if you put it in a case, you would have to have a motherboard in front of it or suspend the video card somehow on like an acrylic platform or something, which there was someone who emailed us about that. We might look into it. But anyway, point is that specifically that type of imaging, you can't put it in a real world environment without really a lot of custom effort and upfit. And this was the first time we'd ever done it. We had discovered Schlieren imaging. I said in that video, I think it was 24 hours before we did the like setup and the testing and the upload. It was insane how fast that turned around. And again, the main point I make in the video is this is just cool and we think it's neat, and you can see how the air density gradient changes in around the video card based on this, but we can't draw sweeping conclusions. I spent basically half the video saying that. And so the sort of teaching point here is I find it really odd that this user, out of all the things we've done, decided to be upset with our Schlieren imaging, because that specifically was something where we very directly said we haven't done this and we're not really sure what to do with it, but hey, this is neat, so let's try it out. And also said that we're gonna get better at it if we do more of it. So really odd to choose that one out of everything. But the point I would like everyone to take away from this is that when we do something that is new to us and we tell you this is new to us, we're not quite sure what to do with this data yet or how useful it is in general, but give us some time. We'd like you to actually give us some time and not like attack us with our own transparency. Because what it does is if people just get mad every time we try to add a new type of testing and we declare this is new, we disclose, we're not exactly sure what to do, we've done everything we need to do, but we're trying to improve here and add new stuff. And we're not like the cooler tests. I've been doing cooler tests for, I don't know, like 6 years or something now. And it took me 3 of just passively thinking every now and then about how we could improve it to put a plan together. And then it took me 6 months of doing testing and validation to actually execute a new plan. So it's not like it's just overnight we're experts at some type of new testing. It does in fact take time to put together. So to expect that something we explicitly declare as potentially flawed is going to be perfect is not my fault. It is the user's fault. We've declared everything we need to declare, we've disclosed everything we need to disclose, and that's really the end of that. The next one is FPS and frame time. The user says, this video, what is this video? Oh man, that is ancient, but okay. 2018 video featuring Scott Wasson, who is awesome. Currently works at AMD, but ran Tech Report for a number of years. More or less, I want to say invented frame time benchmarking. It was Scott Wasson and PC roughly around the same time. Scott Wasson really did a lot of pioneering work on that. So this video is featuring him, and he's great. You should definitely check out the interview with him. Anyway, the user says, this video discusses FPS as an average in order to contrast it with frame time plots. The actual approach used for FPS metrics is to treat the value as a time-independent probability distribution and then report a percentile within that distribution. The averaging behavior they are talking about depends on decisions you make when reporting data. Yes, that's literally everything that we do depends on decisions you make when reporting data. That's like all of it. There's not like a universal constant. You can't just like hold a meter in the air and get the FPS. It's not a universal constant. So it's not like gravity. So yeah, I agree. It does in fact change based on when we choose to benchmark a specific part of a game. That's inherently different than benchmarking another part of the game. So what you're really going for is producing enough of a sort of sweep of data to say this is generally about the difference between these two parts relatively. And this is the point I'd like people to take home from this one, is when we're comparing two parts, you really shouldn't, for the most part, and there are exceptions I'll briefly mention, you really shouldn't be looking at the raw FPS numbers of those parts. So for example, if we show you, I don't know, a CPU A does 100 FPS and CPU B does, let's do easy numbers, 50 FPS, we might tell you that there's about a 50% improvement going from B to A. And that's the main thing you should take away. Not that there's a 50 FPS improvement, because that obviously doesn't really mean a lot, because it'll change game to game. Now, there are times you can take the hard numbers as an absolute value, and I shouldn't use that phrasing, someone will pick that apart too. You can take the hard numbers as an absolute difference and look at basically like game settings benchmarks. If a new game comes out, and we used to do this more, we do a benchmark showing settings A versus settings B on CPU-C. Right? That's like a very fixed thing. Then you can start looking at the fixed values, because if you have the same types of parts, the same exact parts we're using, or very close to it, you can expect those absolute values as opposed to those absolute numbers as opposed to the percentages, which those would follow. But in a per game benchmark, you're probably more as a user looking for like, I really want 120 FPS, can I hit it with these parts? So if we test that game with the settings you're interested in, with the parts you have, definitely use the exact numbers, but otherwise percentages are the main takeaway. Okay, this person continues and says, the averaging behavior they're talking about, oh yeah, got that. It is not inherent to the concept of FPS. Contrasting FPS with frame time is odd because the differences are based on reporting methodology. Again, I don't really have like a polite way to say duh, but we sort of say that in like all of our methodology pieces. And I can't in every review make the same explanations of how we report data, because then every video would be like 3 hours long. So we do assume that the user knows that you are abstracting things away from a base metric of time when you report a rate. But anyway, if you make different reporting decisions, you can derive metrics from FPS measurements that fit the general idea of, quote, smooth gameplay. One example is the amount of time between FPS dips. Okay, I don't really know what the point is with this one. But what is the point with this one? Okay, so I guess they want us to report it differently. But this is one of those, like, why is it me that you're taking issue with when this is how pretty much everyone does it? So it's like well understood. I don't know. I don't really understand this one. Last one, error bars. This concern doesn't have a video attached to it and is more general. GN frequently reports, quote, questionable error bars, okay, and remarks on test significance with insufficient data. You have absolutely no idea how much data we do or don't have. I literally ran, I'm not joking, this is not an exaggeration, and I guess at some point I'll do a video of this too. Literally ran 1,000 test passes of GTA 5 with a fixed set of hardware, and actually a couple other games too, and 1,000 test passes with 7-zip to determine the standard deviation one run to the next. And this person, I will absolutely admit, knows more words relating to statistics than I do. I am not a stat major. I didn't really do well at math in school, but I'm a good test technician and a good test engineer, and I can tell you the numbers relating to the things we're testing with pretty good confidence. So literally 1,000 test passes of a few games and a few production applications. And that produced millions upon millions of rows of data, because you're taking data every time a frame is presented. So that is like, this user, it's so weird to me how Reddit works. This is what I complained about before, where I'm willing to cede that we are obviously going to have errors every now and then. We're obviously imperfect, and we work to improve stuff. But yes, in fact, there will be problems with testing sometimes. Just the other day, we published a review where I accidentally had temperature instead of frequency as the axis label. Data was fine, but the label was wrong, so it looked like something was like 1900 degrees Celsius. But everyone understood that that was an error for the most part. So yeah, we make mistakes, obviously. I'm not contesting that. And there are things I've learned over the years that I was really happy to have commenters point out in a very kind way. For example, long ago, I was comparing the temperature on like some GPU, and this was in maybe 2014 or 15 or something, barely knew what I was doing. And someone pointed out that like, hey, you shouldn't use percent to compare degrees because they're both abstract scales. They don't start at 0 when you're looking at degrees Celsius, so it changes when you change the scale to Fahrenheit or whatever else. And I made that point actually against Thermaltake many years later. But you know, the point is here that I read these comments and I do genuinely try to learn from them, and I have learned a lot from them, like that percent scaling one with temperature. Didn't know that before. percent difference. When I first started in 2007 or 8 with the website, I didn't know, because I was bad at math classes in school, and I'd started this after dropping out, so that didn't help. I didn't know how to do a proper percent improvement versus percent decrease. I learned that from viewers commenting. So very open to learning. I try to improve by reading the comments all the time. But this particular one there's so much bravado and confidence in what he's saying or she's saying with the remarks on test significance with insufficient data, which ironically, they're talking about our confidence in data being too high, while they are confidently stating something for which they have no evidence and are actually extremely wrong. I don't think there's anybody else who's done 1,000 test passes of GTA 5 with one set of hardware, or the other games. They say, due to silicon lottery, some chips will perform better than others, and there's guaranteed population sampling error. Literally every review is going to have a chance for sampling error. Like, what do you want me to do? I just assume that people know that sample to sample there can be variation. That said, this user is extremely wrong in stating that because of silicon lottery, there is going to be some meaningful difference, because typically, especially in past generations, CPUs have a fixed specification that they hit, and there's not really variance in stock performance. Now that we've got TVB and Precision Boost 2, there's a little bit of variance, but it's totally irrelevant as long as you disclose what cooler you're using and how you test things. And we talk in our methodology about how there will be variance. In fact, in all of our reviews, we say there'll be variance in the overclocking results, and that we're basically benchmarking the silicon fitness of that one chip, and it can't be extrapolated to everything. And if we don't say that in some of the reviews, it's because, well, I'd be saying the same thing every time. And we expect people to sort of understand stuff at some point and hope that people in the comments will help the new people out if the new people didn't catch previous videos. So this user, I'm not sure, really understands silicon quality, or at least the actual impact it has on testing. That's more of an overclocking thing. And if you're going to talk about that, you might as well talk about the cooler variation too, and the pressure of each cooler. So these are all things that we disclose. Everybody has this problem. Literally all reviewers will have the problem of not having enough samples, especially at launch. Now, some people, we've done this too in the past, but some people will go out and buy a whole bunch of a new CPU or GPU after launch and do a comparison. That's really cool. It doesn't happen too often. Linus did one not long ago. I think Hardware Unboxed did one before with like a i9 or something. And awesome, but for a review, the timelines are a few days, maximally 2 weeks for like a CPU from a company that's confident in its product like AMD. So sample bias in data is going to be a thing. We just expect that people won't be stupid about it. And generally speaking, that's not too much to expect. And also, even if people do think that all parts always perform the same way forever, the variance stock isn't that much. And like we've already disclosed our test platform, variance from memory or the cooler will be greater. But we've put that out there, we've told you what it is, and that's really the best we can do. You can't test on every configuration that exists. They say, with those examples, I bring my mini essay to a close. For anyone wondering who got to the end, of this, thank you. If you're wondering why I'm bringing up Gamers Nexus in particular, I'll point to the commentary about error bars. Some of the information they're trying to convey could be considered misinformation, and it potentially gives viewers a false sense of confidence in the results. I'd argue that, okay, whatever. So the error bars shows you the run-to-run variance of that test, and it's pretty damn small. So this person has no room to speak about how close the run-to-run variation is on the tests, because they don't know. They don't have the thousands of test passes. We do. But we've put them in the standard deviation bars in the graphs. That shows you the low end of the performance maximally or minimally achievable, and the high end of performance maximally achievable on the parts that we are testing. And we've added a buffer in, so you've got plenty of room to look at two parts and go, oh, these are roughly within the bars, so they're basically the same. We can't have the level of precision to say that 199 versus 198 FPS average, 199 is better. And we pretty much, if I'm writing the script anyway, and if Patrick does it, then I normally catch it if he doesn't say this, but we pretty much always say they are functionally the same. So anyway, this thing continues and says, and it potentially gives viewers a false sense of confidence in their results. I'd argue that's a worse situation than the reviewers who present lower quality data but make the limitations more apparent. We make the limitations extremely apparent, and the data is high quality, and a lot of the other reviewers also have very high quality data. So I don't know. I mean, ultimately, a couple things here. We expect that people understand regarding sample size that pretty much everyone's working off of one sample, but case products, cooler products, silicon products don't perform that differently when you're talking stock performance. And the differences that do exist are still valid product level differences that should still be reflected in a review. So typically you see these in follow-ups. If someone happens to get a dud, which doesn't, I can't remember a time that's really happened recently, then you'll see a follow-up where they purchase or acquire another one after finding out, because all the other reviews go live, that it was a dud. But again, I can't remember a time in recent history that's happened. So the standard reviews process, you would find out on publication with everyone else's results if you had a product that happened to be underperforming. But again, that's not really, generally speaking, a thing that happens, especially with such high-profile products where they're all pre-tested anyway. So this sense of like, I think this particular person thinks there's a lot more variance than there really is, product to product, and the variance that does exist is functionally irrelevant. So the impact of variance on fan manufacturing for a cooling product, for example, you're gonna have an RPM plus or minus about 10%, and of course you'll have some variance in the noise produced at a given RPM as well. That's just the nature of manufacturing. But every review anywhere is going to be limited in sample size, and you just expect that, generally speaking, within reason, within the perspective of someone buying a product for use, it is good enough to have one sample, maybe two. And this is also why, at the end of all of the reviews, or beginning sometimes, we recommend checking out other reviews, because there are a lot of really good reviewers out there, and we don't all look at the same stuff because there's too much stuff to look at, because computers are very complex. So, we're saying, create your own aggregate, create your own image of multiple reviews, and pull the pieces from each review that best reflect your usage scenario. So if we don't represent, let's take an example, maybe we don't have an Unreal Engine like game development test or of any kind right now. Or actually, better one, we don't have any Linux testing. So if you're a Linux user and a Windows user, you can look at our stuff and go, okay, well, this Premiere, this Photoshop data, this is useful to me. And you look at like Variance and you use their Linux data. And that's kind of how it's supposed to work. You shouldn't be expecting one outlet to provide everything, and also to provide like third-party validation lab level of, it's not even that actually, it would be first-party validation lab product-to-product variance testing. So we expect that viewers expect there's a reasonable level of potential variance unit to unit, but it's not going to be that large, and certainly not large enough, generally speaking, to impact the verdict on the product. If you're talking like a 20 megahertz change in peak single-threaded performance on a 5950X, it doesn't matter. It's not gonna show up. Like, that'll show up in competitive overclocking, and that's about it. So this is the kind of difference. You have to think about, when this person's talking about unit-to-unit variance, what does that mean? Well, I can tell you, because we at one point had 14, I think, or 13 2080 Ti's, all the same model, right? Because we did that test of memory artifacting and like glitching out that was happening. And when we tested that, I have still data of the frequency achieved by each card. And generally speaking, you're talking like 15, 20 megahertz differences, which is less than 1% change in the performance of the product in FPS. So, this is something that's been blown way out of proportion as mattering, because it just really doesn't. So I think this is a standard example of someone who thinks that they, somewhat ironically, know a lot more about the level of variance and sort of data quality than they do, because this person was speaking from the perspective of a researcher. That's not what we're representing. That's not our audience. We're representing consumers who are buying things for maybe professional work or gaming or something like that. And for those people, for everybody in our audience really, the data is more than good enough. Like, it's about as good as you can get, given the constraints that we are extremely open about. Again, things like sampling and things like that. So a couple last comments they made. They said, again, this is just me bringing up a concern I have with Gamers Nexus's approach to research and publication. All right, I mean, that's not my fault that you're not really listening to the whole content the way it's presented. They do a lot of high quality testing, gee thanks, and I'm a fairly avid viewer. It's just I feel that there are some instances where the coverage misleads viewers to the detriment of all involved. Again, strongly disagree. I think the quality and usefulness of their work could be dramatically improved by working harder. Okay. Literally not possible at this point. Like, I'm still doing 100 hours a week, so all right, that's whatever. Just demonstrating like an extreme unawareness to the situation and how any of this works. Okay, anyway, yeah, this is, it looks like it was actually deleted by the mods at one point and then reinstated. So a couple last things. Obviously strongly disagree with almost all of this post, but the last couple of things, there are flaws in our approach and everyone else's approach to testing. And what we do as we grow, as over the years we've grown, is you sort of figure those out as you're going. And sometimes you're like, oh crap, that's really, doesn't work the way I thought it did. And you do a methodology overhaul and fix it. And it's piece by piece. You're fixing everything along the way. And as you fix stuff, new stuff becomes a problem because new product behaviors, or an example would be things like TVB and Precision Boost 2, where now suddenly, previously it didn't really matter to control the room temperature too much. So for a thermal test, we would, plus or minus like 1 degree Celsius. But for a CPU benchmark, for example, it really didn't matter that much back in like the 7700K days. If you're doing a stock benchmark or something, and the room's 21C one day and 24 or 5C the next day, it just didn't really matter because it wasn't thermally, the clock was not contingent upon thermals. Now though, as things have changed, just as an example of kind of how we stay on top of these changes, Precision Boost 2, when we first started testing Ryzen 3000, we noticed that we would run like a 3600 one day and run it the next day. And depending on what else was running in that room, the performance was a little different. So we spent a lot of time researching it, eventually found out that, oh, okay, like with Precision Boost 2, a couple degrees will actually swing the frequency a little bit. Not enough to matter from a user standpoint, but enough to matter from a, we've got a lot of data and it all needs to socket in very cleanly where there's a hierarchy that makes sense standpoint. So, you know, like 10, maybe 15 megahertz, typically something like 10 though would be more common for those smaller changes. 10, 15 megahertz, you start seeing like 136.2 FPS for day one, average of all the tens of thousands of data points, versus something like 135 point whatever. Takeaway, I think, is if you think that you're going to a review for 100% precision, then you are reading reviews wrong. You're watching reviews incorrectly. That's not how they're really meant. You're looking more for accuracy of the data compared to the data in that review. And then you should look at other reviews to look at the data against the other data in those reviews independently and create your own aggregate of the information that is involved. So regarding the quote-unquote errors bars issues, we've switched them to be standard deviation bars. They represent the high and the low bound of how the products will perform in that game. That is known based on a huge amount of testing and spreadsheets, literally thousands upon thousands of test passes at this point, very well defined. And if it ever exits that performance for a given CPU, then we rerun it to see if it's a common issue or if it had been a temporary spike in behavior, which can happen from something like, if Windows does something in the background, you'll see this. Like if Windows Update turns back on, which it does because it's malicious now, then you'll see that kind of change. Regarding the FPS and frame time, whatever, complaints about a bunch of words for statistics and probability and distributions and all these really nice keywords, at the end of the day, people understand what we're presenting and they know what FPS is and they know what frame times are, and that's what we're presenting. Big data hardware surveys, I don't care. That was a really odd one to throw in. I made one offhand comment in one news video. It reads like this is, like I have conspiracy theories about where this post really came from, but it reads like they were looking for problems, because there are so many other problems you could talk about than throwaway line in a news video about a website that pretty much everyone in this community universally agrees is garbage. Schlieren imaging was another, like, okay, something we extremely, like, I over disclosed how that was just a, this is cool, let's see what happens, we're new to this test. So all four of these things are pretty weak arguments. I could make much better arguments against my own content than these, because every day that's what I'm doing. I'm tearing down my own content to improve it. So I am disappointed in this person's poor analysis because I could do a better job of tearing down my own work, which is what we do. But why this got so upvoted for such mundane, common concerns as unit-to-unit variance is unbeknownst to me. I guess it's because our name is big now, and so now we're the target, because it feels like this is happening more often. I'm not going to make one of these for every time this happens. Please don't expect it. But this one I thought deserved addressing because it really exhibits a profound misunderstanding for how content consumption of our content is supposed to work, and I hope that this has helped improve that understanding. This isn't meant to be like a slight at the person. It's just that I fundamentally disagree with almost everything they said. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Not going to make a lot more of these, but we'll probably take this and bridge into like a how reviews should be used thing, because I have noticed that newer people to the channel, and this is really cool, but newer people to the channel will kind of ask, so I don't get it. There's so much here. What am I supposed to take away? And I think we can help with that. And a lot of it's just figuring out your use cases, but that part's kind of hard sometimes when someone has never built a computer before. So we might put together something like that for a, hey, hopefully this helps you use the data better. But yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net or patreon.com/gamersnexus if you would like to help us out directly. And I will see you all next time, hopefully not talking about Reddit.